Hey everyone, Anders here. We're going to go over the latest information and my first impressions of the recent closed beta of Bellatores. Bellatores is a PC sandbox MMORPG from Korean developer NU. The developers promise deep gameplay systems focused on PvP combat, strategic group warfare, and dynamic environments that respond to players' actions. Battles will be heavily influenced by terrain, unit positioning, and weather conditions, adding layers of realism to that combat. Politics will play a crucial role in shaping your faction, with players able to run for office in-game. Guilds will have daily GVGs, where they fight for node control and resource bonuses. There will be daily faction versus faction control type warfare. There is unlimited ranked 1v1 and 3v3 arena with all factions through a matchmaking system. PvE consists of BDO-style grinding for materials and resources at grind spots, and mini dungeons that spawn in those grind spots where you can gain even more resources. The profession or life skills system is crucial to the economy and progression, with gear like armor, weapons, and accessories only available through the crafting system and limited main story quests. If you're a player that would rather not focus on the crafting side, player trading and a marketplace is available to acquire gear that way. No cash app or monetization was available in this beta, but there are signs things like character customization, premium outfits, dyes, and inventory and weight may become monetized in the future. For this beta, almost all items outside of gear weighed the minimum, and inventory did not become an issue till much later on when testers received beta-only boxes with multiple items to help us test endgame gear and skills. Instead of traditional leveling systems, there is a mastery system in place for each weapon, armor, life skill, crafting profession, and even your passives are influenced this way. Pretty much everything revolves around this mastery system. As you obtain mastery XP and reach certain milestones in the mastery tree, you will gain new abilities and ways to change the way your skills work. Skills invested into your mastery system will passively reach a limit where, depending on how far you have progressed with your character, you will have the option to specialize. Specializing with a type of weapon or profession allows you to further enhance those skills. There are, however, limits to how many specializations you can have on any one character. You can reset your skills through an item, but resetting your skills also deletes your skill levels for weapons and even your professions. If you had invested into the max level 10 of, say, the meteor shower skill for the staff weapon, and then you decide to reset your skills to try something else, you would lose your level progress on the meteor shower skill and would have to start over. These require special stones that drop from monsters, and at least in the beta, were not plentiful in my experience. This means with the current mastery system, experimentation is available. However, complex builds can be made and tested, but with the current reset system, it makes it tedious and costly to change builds often. If they want to keep this system to dissuade weapon swapping meta, it would help if they add something like a skill preview to at least showcase how a skill changes with each branch of the tree. Despite this minor gripe, I thought the skill system was very well implemented, and they allow for enough complexity to make theory crafting possible and engaging. Weapons consist of one-handed and two-handed sets. You can only equip 2 weapons at a time, and each weapon is limited to 4 skills each. You can swap weapons mid-combat, and cooldowns, I would say, are on the medium to longer side depending on the weapon. I was unable to test every single weapon combination, but I will go through every weapon available and give you more information on the ones I did manage to test. For the one-handed weapons, each of these pairs up with a shield, which in of itself had its own mastery tree with limited skills you can use as well. But first up, we have the hammer. Surprisingly fun weapon with lightning elemental damage options, which is a theme through all these weapons. They will always have a branch that specializes into elemental damage, with each weapon focusing on at least one available element. For hammer, this would be the lightning element. Next, we have the sword. So sword and shield felt about the same as hammer, but I did not experience more than the basic combat with it. Next, we had the short spear, a combo I thought I would enjoy, but the beginner skills and animations felt too clunky and unappealing. The last one of the one-handed weapons and shield combos is the cross. This is the game's pure healer weapon, and something I wish I had been using from the start of my testing period. This weapon has very little to no damage potential, but the self-buff and party-wide buffing capability is incredible. Healing can be focused on HOTS or heals over time, or fixed instant healing depending on the situation. You also have cleanses to dispel poisons and damage over time effects on your allies. Most party heals seem to have a limit of 8. Healing is absolutely crucial in this game, especially because there is no passive healing at all. Outside of some foods, bandages, and some campsite buffs, passive healing is very hard to find. Potions are on long cooldowns, and bandages are too slow for most PvP content mid-combat. Now let's go over the two-handed weapons we have. Staff is the main weapon I chose to test with, and it felt pretty good for a magic-style weapon. We have fire or earth elemental specialization options, but I found some of the skills with the highest damage were burdened by them being single target or having extremely long casting times to get the full damage output. I don't so mind the casting times being longer for abilities that deal that much damage, but the target reticle for long-range weapons is one of the major issues I had with the game during testing when it came to PvP especially. Your camera is often on the ground with your character blocking, so it's hard to target things at the same level as you. Higher field of view I think would help in this situation. The next weapon we'll go over is the orb. This was my second weapon for the closed beta. I had the staff and orb as a combo. It might be the best PvE weapon in their game early on since they have large AoE damage over time. They have a vacuum ability, mobility AoE as well, and a potent right click as long as you meet the conditions. You can specialize into wind or ice magic. The bow was one I tested briefly, and it seems to be the only weapon we can strafe normal attacks with. Every other weapon roots you in place for normal attacks and skills, with some exceptions. But bow at least had a strafing normal attack. You can spec into lightning or ice damage if you wish, and I found the weapon to be good, but needing some animation improvements. Dual daggers was another fun weapon to use and certainly felt popular in PvP. I saw a lot of people using dual daggers. You can spec into poison elemental damage, but otherwise is limited in AoE. Two-handed hammers can spec into fire elemental damage and felt similar to the New World two-handed hammer. A little worse maybe, could do with some improvements on the feel of the attacks. They felt hollow, but otherwise the weapon felt heavy and slow in its initial animations as it should. Two-handed sword can spec into fire or ice damage and felt very good to use. You have a spin to wind skill that allows you to move while attacking, and comparing it to the Chrono Odyssey Greatsword, which I used a lot in that playtest, I found I liked the Bellatores implementation of Greatsword a little bit better. Lastly, we have the Halberd. Very cool weapon. Ice elemental damage is available, but it suffered from the animation clunkiness I felt with a two-handed hammer. Those are the 11 weapons plus the shield we had available for testing. That is a lot of options for an MMO at launch, but I'm happy to see some less seen options like spear and shield and warhammer already implemented. There's a weapon here that I think will cover most players' preferences. Now before I move on, I want to quickly talk about an issue with the weapons and combat system I mentioned as we went through the weapons, and that is animations. Combat really is nowhere near the level of Black Desert. It feels more like a tap target game without the tap target aspect. Animation tweaks overall need to be improved. I don't like the limit of 4 skills per weapon, but the variety of skill combinations and the slow-paced nature of the game I think makes it okay. On a level playing field, you won't be one-shotting most players, but swapping weapons can be awkward. Dodging feels bad. Very few skills have super armor. It's a problem, but this game reminds me a lot of the old school MMOs. In that sense, I think the combat system has a really good core, but it needs a lot of work still. Moving on, let's talk about the world of Bellatores and what it is you actually do in this game. The map consists of 5 large sections. Each region, so to speak, will be controlled by one faction. This never changes. However, as a player, you can venture into any region you wish. For the beta, we had the Erhard faction and the Collins faction available. Each one of these also have their own aesthetic. Erhard, for example, had more Greco-Roman architecture vibes. Collins felt more medieval Western European with a heavy theme on cavalry, sort of like the Riders of Rohan aesthetic from Lord of the Rings. When you start the game, you have to choose which faction you want to join, and whatever your choice, that's pretty much it. You are locked into that faction for that account. You can create other characters within the same faction, and this can be useful for getting more resources and trying out different roles without having to reset your skills. There's also an account-wide storage, which allows you to effectively manage your alts this way, but they will always be locked to your chosen faction for that account. There are also no safe zones in the game. If you want to engage the enemy capital with a small force while everyone is busy crafting and talking to NPCs, you can do that. And sure enough, we had multiple incursions from the Collins faction, especially right after the maintenance, where they gave everyone max level gear and items. I saw a couple of English-speaking players complain about the starting area being bombarded by enemy faction players that were raining down meteors, killing them every time they respawned. I honestly think that's intended, but I don't think it's an issue, mainly because in the beta we had limited numbers of players. If an enemy faction is assaulting your capital and killing your new players, there's a very high chance those enemy players will get instantly hunted down and they won't be a problem in live servers. That said, no place is safe. Enemy factions are always flagged, but I think if you're more of a crafter or life skiller and don't like the sound of open world PvP like this, keep in mind there is a whole faction of PvP players on your side looking to protect their members and looking for content when there isn't GVG or node wars going on. It's especially worth protecting your crafters since they will be one of the most important players in the game economy and a driving force for your faction's gear progression. Speaking of gear, gear is divided into tiers. You have tier 1 at the start and tier 6 at the end game. The way tiers work is you need to level your character enough to be able to equip that type of tier armor. For example, if you specialize into light armor and unlock tier 5, you're able to equip tier 5 light armor. However, if you try to equip tier 6 light armor or tier 5 heavy armor, you won't be able to because you haven't unlocked those skills. The same works for weapons. As you increase your weapon mastery, you will unlock the options for higher tiers of that weapon. If you unlock tier 2 daggers, you will only be able to use daggers that are tier 2 or below. Aside from tiers, each weapon, armor, and accessory has a rarity grade. It goes from uncommon to rare to epic, or to make it simpler, gray to blue to yellow to purple. Gear loses durability over time. You will need to repair it in a town eventually. Items you craft can be made higher rarity at a chance, and this can be improved as you level your crafting mastery, but otherwise you will have to use enchantment elixirs to change the rarity of your items. Each one has a percentage chance to become a higher rarity. You lose nothing for doing this, though it does consume gold and the elixirs. From my testing, elixirs drop from monsters and quest rewards. Enchanting your gear will also give you random stats, which means just because you made that item yellow grade as an example, that doesn't mean the stats you got applied are the ones you want. You might have to reroll a few times to get the stats you need. I don't see this being something you even think about really until maybe tier 5 and tier 6, since the resource investment is high, and from my experience, tier 5 would be the first logical place in normal progression to start investing into your gear. Gear also has reforged slots. Each type of gear can have 1 to 4 of these slots, and they can change depending on the craft. Some reforged slots can also be gem slots, and others can be just simple stat bonuses. If it's a gem slot, you can add crystals that, from what I saw, were primarily elemental damage or mitigation stat bonuses. So if you wanted to have higher fire damage, you would use fire crystals on your gem reforged slots. If you wanted to be tankier against physical damage as a tank, you would use physical crystals. Reforged slots also come pre-locked for each piece of gear. This means you can't automatically apply their effect. You need to use these reforged elixirs or other gear to unlock each slot. The elixirs and the gear pieces each will increase your slot XP by a certain amount, and when you unlock it, it stays unlocked for good. So even if you were to unlock all 4 slots of your item and then you decide you want to try and enchant the item into epic rarity, you can do so and you will never lose your unlocked reforged slots or effects. Now moving on to PvE, there is monster grind zones and dungeons in the game. Monster grind zones are very similar to Black Desert. Certain areas of the map have zones where you can grind depending on your tier level. The higher the tier, the better the drops. Monsters tend to drop items you need to progress your gear, as well as gold, which you need for everything in the game. Most grind spots are also near a campsite or a town. Campsites allow you to use buffs that last usually an hour and give you some benefits, but the most important thing about campsites, I think, is that they serve as respawning points as long as you link to the campsite before starting your grind or engaging in PvP combat. This saves you a lot of time in case you unexpectedly die, and when you do die, you can either choose to respawn at the nearest town or campsite. There is also an item that lets you avoid this respawn timer, and allies can even res you as long as you haven't been last hit. While you grind in an area, monsters may drop keys that allow you to access nearby dungeons. These are more cellars or mini dungeons really than what you would classify as a typical MMO dungeon. When you enter these, you will have a small area to go through with monsters and a timer to clear them. Sometimes you may have mini bosses instead, and again have a timer to clear those. Once you complete the objective, you can loot the reward chest and the barrels for resources. PvE in general serves to fuel PvP, and the lack of complexity reflects this. Monsters are almost always in groups of 4 units per pack. One unit is usually a ranged enemy, making multi-pack pulls pretty difficult. On top of that, our AoE skills are mostly limited to 8 enemy targets targets, making mass pulls difficult to pull off depending on the zone. 3 times a day there is also a world boss raid, which was pretty straightforward. Deal damage to the boss, avoid the red circles, and get rewards. It started out pretty easy, to be honest. The boss had a moment, however, where it stopped moving. Might have been a mechanic, could have been a bug, I'm not sure. But things then started getting pretty chaotic as the boss lowered in health, to the point where the sheer number of effects on the screen made it hard to see where everything was. Once he died, he dropped some tokens, but I'm not sure as to their use. The main story is very similar to older Korean MMOs like Blade and Soul and Terra. Essentially, you want to go from point A to point B, do some quests. They'll ask you to kill a certain number of monsters to progress. There's maybe an elite from time to time. Repeat, very basic. Progression can get difficult if you rely on the main story for gear, since it may not be obvious that you should be crafting your own gear sets to help you clear faster. The main story only gives you a few pieces of gear every tier. Outside of the main story missions that you can see in the map with a red color, there are character promotion missions in purple that require you to talk to an NPC to be able to continue to gain XP. Green missions are normally tutorial missions, blue missions are side quests, and yellow missions are town board quests you can pick up to gain additional resources and XP for the area you'll be grinding nearby. There is a Codex you can obtain relics to fill in and gain permanent stats. These relics can be found through exploration. Scrolls can also be found to fill out their own Codex for rewards as well. There are also artifacts in the game that can be enhanced and equipped on your character. These items each give you a specific bonus effect. Typically, you want to equip artifacts with stats that benefit your role, so more crit chance for DPS as an example, more raw damage, that would be helpful as a DPS. The artifacts can then be re-rolled to obtain higher thresholds or rarity for their effect, and the game lets you see the re-roll before choosing to accept the new artifact bonus or keep the one you have. Titles in this game are also important because they give you stat bonuses as well. They can be acquired when you specialize in the mastery system or through quests. Each title gives you different effects and can be enhanced up to level 10. Enhancing is RNG, but there's no downgrade on fails. You can swap whichever title you're using through the title NPC in most towns. Stats are similar to that of Throne and Liberty. There are many of them, and you gain points to allocate as you level in character experience through the mastery system progression. Some stats affect raw damage, while others affect crit chance, and others focus more on mitigation. You can reset your stats for free below a certain level, but around the time I was crafting tier 3 gear, the stats required me to consume a limited item to reset. Factions have a politics tab that allows players to run for office, though the exact powers and benefits are unknown to me. Guilds can have up to 30 members and can participate in daily GVGs over resource nodes. These can be seen on the maps as statues and can be fought for once a day. Whichever guild deals the most damage to the pillar before the timer ends wins the node. Faction war also happens every day at a different time than GVG. You will usually be given a teleport scroll to the fort location, and you will either need to take the castle or defend it depending on where the fort is located. There are control points that you need to hold to increase your points inside and outside the castle, and the faction that reaches the point threshold first wins. I was only able to attend one of these faction wars when I was a relatively low level player. I had tier 1 gear, which meant I was not very helpful to my teammates, but the flow of battle felt pretty dynamic, and overall for a beta it was a good experience. Life skills are core to your progression. You can increase your mastery levels the more you gather or craft. You can specialize in a craft to be able to produce higher quality items or gather at a faster rate. For example, with mining, it takes a long time to gather the node, over 10 seconds normally with tier 1 tools, and around 5 or 6 seconds with tier 6 tools. You can specialize in mining and focus on reducing your mining time in 3 different ways. Either you can reduce it by a flat amount, have a chance to reduce the mining time by half, or the last option would be to have an even smaller chance to reduce the mining time to near instant. With crafting, it works in a similar way. You can focus on making your crafts have a higher chance to be rare or epic, or choose to have a higher chance to make crafted gear contain all 4 reforged slots every time you craft. Gathering nodes all respawn in under a minute. A rotation of 3 to 4 nodes, depending on the area, is enough to have a consistent gathering rotation with tier 1 tools. Nodes that respawn will always be the same type, but may be different materials. For example, if you have a rotation with 1 ore node, 1 wild herb node, and 1 tree node, they will always respawn as an ore, wild herb, and tree node respectively. However, what changes is the material of that node. It can be a gold ore node in one cycle or an iron ore node in the next. Higher tier zones seem to have higher chance for more rare material nodes to spawn. Tanning is the only profession that requires you to kill monsters, and they can then have a chance to allow you to skin them for their materials. Crafting is done in towns, and in the capital, you will have crafting stations that allow you to refine raw materials to then use on the crafting station you need with a general material vendor nearby. You can also salvage gear you don't need to get some materials. Crafting gear will always need certain tier materials as well as cores. These cores drop from monsters. Tier 6 cores, for example, will drop from tier 5 elites or tier 6 zones. Tier 1 cores can drop from tier 1 or tier 2 zones. To be able to craft higher tier gear, you will need to first craft lower tier items to gain enough XP in your mastery tree, so even tier 1 cores stay useful in the endgame. You don't actually need to be able to craft tier 6 gear to equip tier 6 gear. Equipping armor is its own mastery tree, so you could essentially forego crafting and buy your armor from other players if you wish. You can equip the set as long as you have enough armor mastery. Character customization is deep and allows you to change most features. There is no gender lock when you first create your character. Premium outfits can be used over your gear, but there is a hide helmet option that you can use anytime. Dyeing your premium outfits is easy and allows for a good range of colors. Horses can also be dyed into different shades, and they can also be given horse gear with their own tiers similar to Black Desert. The horse itself is clunky to use and needs animation improvements. You do have 2 dashes that replenish over time, and as far as I could tell, it was almost impossible to catch an enemy player if they ran on their horse. Graphic settings include upscaling like DLSS 4 and FSR 3, and the game looked very similar on epic and low settings with some very slight performance improvements. Though I was pushing sometimes over 200 FPS in some cases on lower settings, there is a stutter that occurs whenever you perform actions that makes it feel much worse than it is. Performance suffered in Node Wars, and the overabundance of effects made it hard to see. In normal play it's fine, but I'm hoping they add an optimization mode for those that want pure performance. Adding an option maybe to hide ally skills, but keeping allied ground effects would also be helpful. Making PVE monster enemy AoE a different color to red would be helpful as well. Overall, the game has a lot of potential and is something I recommend for those looking for a truly open world PvP game with little restrictions. While the release window is still a bit hazy, the game is targeting a global PC release. And that's all we know about Bellatores so far. The game was in Korean, so please excuse any mistakes I may have made about some of the game systems. I'll do my best to update the pinned comment in case there is any egregious mistakes. Stay tuned for more Bellatores videos in the future on the channel, including possible English language betas and as we know more about the game. Let me know what you guys think about the game in the comments. Do you like the look of the combat and general gameplay? Do you like the reliance on crafters for progression? Let me know in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching, thanks for listening. I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.